Hello, Jim12s here again. This is my first video of 2025. It's the 22nd of January. And today I find myself on Blue Gum Creek Trail, which is northwest Sydney. And it's not actually a track marked on the map that I found, but it is definitely a track and there are signposts. I do recommend it if you want to get out of the city. Anyway, today my topic is addiction, and I've particularly referenced three people for what I want to share, and there's also a lot of crickets who want to get on the recording, so at times I might find myself just pausing a moment. I hope you don't mind. So the three are Johan Hari, who's I think an Englishman by his accent, 2015, Jordan Peterson, 2017, who's a Canadian, and Gabor Maté, who I think is American, from 2020. And I'll put the links to their material down below. So, yes, addiction. I've really wrestled with how on earth to talk about addiction. There are so many competing views, competing emotions. It's just a minefield. And anyway, I'm going to have a go and let's see where we get to, eh? So I've got four sections. Firstly, what is addiction? Number two, what causes addiction? How do we respond to the addict? And finally, religious experiences. Anyway, let's kick off with what is addiction. Now, I found it very hard to get a definition, but this, I think, will be a good illustration. It's only talking about nicotine, and there are dozens and dozens of habits and substances that we can become addicted to. I know, but just using the example of nicotine for a second, it is said that once nicotine is in the blood, it gets to the brain within 10 seconds. And within 10 seconds, it stimulates the production of adrenaline, which is basically the fight or flight hormone, and it creates in us a new sense of energy, and particularly a new sense of pleasure. We are alive, we are alert, we are ready for anything. But that adrenaline hit dies very quickly, and of course, hence the addiction. You need a new boost of nicotine to create a new boost of adrenaline, and off we go. Now then, number two. What are the causes of addiction? Now, I found this really fascinating. Let me throw this one at you first of all. A lack of bonding to something good. So if there is nothing we perceive in our environment that is good, then we will bond to something that gives us a temporary relief. Another thought is addiction is an attempt to escape suffering. And this idea implies that there's a trauma that we've experienced that hasn't been healed, acknowledged, managed, dealt with, healed. And therefore the substance or the habit or whatever it is an attempt at escaping that suffering. Now, if the non-addict were to think of the addict as somebody who was suffering because of their environment that was none of their making, we might be less judgmental. So, number 3, how do we respond to an addict? I was really struck by the idea or the fact that 100 years ago Western society basically criminalized addiction. So therefore the person who is addicted is then deemed to be judged, even without a trial or a jury. They are judged. Now, apparently Portugal decided that this wasn't a good approach and it wasn't getting any results after 100 years, and therefore let's scrap the idea. And they did, and with the promise that they would put all the resources that they had been expending into supporting addicts rather than punishing them. And that's seen a 50% drop in some measures of addiction, which I think is a fantastic way forward. Now, typically an addict who is not able to access their habit or substance can typically be angry, manipulative, lying. And when we see this being exhibited, anger, manipulation and lies, the natural response is to recoil and to isolate, run away from, and it's too unpleasant. It's just awful, and we want to judge, and we know we shouldn't, and so we just run, which arguably is probably a very bad thing to do. How does medicine respond to addiction? I found this fascinating. The idea is that medicine isn't a pure science now, if it ever was. It's actually 50% science, 50% ideology. And the typical way that medicine will treat addiction is popping in more pills, more substances, which I find quite ironic, that to treat an addiction you actually add more chemical stimuli of various sorts. So basically I'm just running away from a medical route. I'm not saying it would never work, but I'm just thinking, I might give that a pass. Then there's cold turkey. We all know about this one. You send the addict to a rehab of some description, and all their sources of addiction are cut off, and it's absolutely murder for example 2 weeks, but eventually they're free, and then you release them, and then they hit the stimuli again. Somebody suggests they go and have a drink, and boom, they're back as if nothing had happened. So cold turkey again. Now, there needs to be, and this is Jordan Peterson's phrase, a whole personality change to ensure freedom. In other words, you can't just take away the stimuli or the substances or whatever it happens to be. You have to build a whole new character, arguably, so that, if you like, the picture of a defensive work, so that there's no doorway for the old habit to get back in again. And another response, which I really do like, is let's deepen the connection with the addict. Yeah, it's like pushing uphill, it's like swimming against the tide, but if the addict is lacking connection, then, and we have the capacity to create connection, then I think, in a non-judgmental way of course, I think this is fantastic. In fact, the opposite of addiction, I would argue, is connection. Connection on many levels, personal, family, community, nation. You can think of it on various levels, but how connected is an addict to their environment? I would argue they're in an abstraction of the reality and not feet on the ground reality. And so, finally, a word about a religious conversion. Now, Jordan Peterson brought this up in 2017 in a class, and he said 80% of people who have a mystical experience can successfully become free from addiction. In other words, they've had a complete personality change on account of their religious conversion. So, here's a thought. Does an addict, they don't need a chemical, they don't need to be cold turkeyed, they need to be loved, and they need a religious experience. And I'm not saying what sort of religious experience, but you can imagine what I am talking about. There is a change blowing through the valley. I don't know whether you can hear it. Wow, that is remarkable. It is 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and there's a roar in the top of the trees. Sounds like a train, but there are no trains anywhere near here. Anyway, so I'll leave that one with you folks. A religious experience is the key to addiction. And before the camera gets blown over, I will say goodbye till next time. Thank you. Bye for now.